What's up, guys? In this video, I want to share some workflow tips on gain staging and how to get a perfectly dialed premaster to send to your mastering engineer every time. A while back, I did a video on 6 essential tips on how to prepare your track for mastering. And I think that was back a long ways ago. It was like in 2011 or something. I'll drop a link to that video in the description. But one of the tips was to export your premaster at -6 dB below full scale. And the reason for that is because mastering engineers like a bit of headroom to be able to work with. So if your track is peaking all the way up to 0 dB or close to that, it's likely that your mastering engineer is actually going to send it back to you, get you to re-render it. It's going to waste your time. It's going to waste your mastering engineer's time. It's a pain in the butt. So I'm going to show you guys my personal workflow. I'm a mix engineer and a mastering engineer. I do both. And I have a Mixdown template that I've built that helps me to nail that every single time. A couple of really simple but powerful things that you guys can implement in your production that'll make it super easy for you to render your premasters perfect every single time. All right, you guys ready? Let's get into it.
Auxiliary fusion.
This is my production and mixdown template. I use this for every song I produce personally and for all my mixdown work with my clients. A lot of people ask when you should mix, like while you're writing the track or after you're done. And there's a lot of discussion around that. My philosophy is that you should actually do as much of the mixing duties as possible before you even start by using a well-designed template. This template's something that I first made about 10 years ago, and I've been refining it and tweaking it ever since, making lots of improvements. I wanted to give this to you guys as a gift to help you with your own production, so I've dropped a download link below the video for you. Grab that for free, and it's yours to use. So the first thing you're going to want to do is gain stage everything down by 16 dB. I'll get into why I use that exact number in just a sec. You're going to want to do this because as you add things to your mix, you're going to really quickly be clipping the master. For example, everything in most sample packs is normalized right up to 0 dB. They do this so that all the samples have a relatively consistent level. So if you add, say, a kick and a clap together, you're already maxed out and in the red. Also, there's a tendency when most people are mixing for the levels to get louder and louder. This is because it's a lot easier to turn one thing up than to turn, say, everything else down. So if you're wanting to, for example, mix a lead so that it takes center stage and it feels really forward in your mix, well, it's most people's first instinct to just turn up the lead relative to everything else. So you start to get hotter and hotter levels. By gain staging everything down initially in your template, it gives you lots of headroom to be able to do this. Now, how I do this is by using a custom audio effect rack channel strip that I set as the default for any audio or MIDI track that I add to the project. Here's the rack that I use. It's got an EQ8 with macros mapped for low and high shelving filters for quick mixing duties, and a utility device that's set to -16 dB. In addition to setting up our levels right, I find this rack to be really useful to do common mixdown edits, like removing the lows out of everything except my kick and sub with a high-pass filter, or by boosting the high shelf to bring a certain lead element closer to us. If you're using Ableton Live as your DAW, you can set a custom track as your default by simply loading the effects or racks that you want, then right-clicking and selecting Save as Default Track. You'll need to do this separately for audio and MIDI tracks. Okay, so we've covered how and why to gain stage down to add the needed headroom for mixing, but you're probably asking yourself why it's -16 dB and how this gets you that perfect -6 dB premaster when you export. Well, don't worry, my friend, because that's coming right up next. If you look at the master bus in my template, you'll find another custom rack. This has a spectrum, EQ8, and a utility with various parameters macro mapped. I use these when I'm mixing to see and hear what I'm doing. For example, I often use the low-pass filter from the EQ8 to focus in on just the bottom end of the mix to get that right. But the most important thing I want you to notice is the utility. It's pushing the gain of the master up by 6 dB. So if you're scratching your head at that, let me explain. I produce, mix, and master electronic music almost exclusively. Usually I find that placing the kick at around -10 dB and then mixing everything else around that is a pretty good place to start. Not always, of course, but as a loose guideline, it usually works for me. If you have all your tracks gain staged to -16, with a plus 6 dB on your master, a normalized kick from a sample pack will then be peaking at -10. But why even have the plus 6 dB on the master, right? Why not just have all the tracks set to -10 dB and be done with it? Well, that's where this perfect 6 dB of headroom comes in. Think about it this way. If you have a plus 6 dB on your master, all you need to do is mix your project so that the peak levels are just beginning to tickle the red on your master fader. Then, when you're all done, you just remove the utility on your master and boom, you've got a perfect, clean, -6 dBFS premaster. The reason I like this workflow is that you can easily see every time you clip. You get a nice visual indication by the master fader going red that you're over. Every time that happens, you know you need to hunt something down and fix it in your mix. Let's say you see a clip in your drop. You might, upon investigation, discover that when your kick and your bass sum together, that's causing the problem. And you can then apply some dynamic EQ or maybe some more aggressive sidechain compression to sort that out. I've found that this has made me a way better mix engineer because I can see issues with my mix really early on, and it helps to understand when and where the problems are. I find this way less painstaking than trying to keep an eye on your peak levels through the entire process. You just watch the master fader, mix your tune to the point where it's on the verge of going red, but not over, and there you are, easy peasy. I told you this was going to be simple, right? But the thing is, when people see this workflow, they're like, oh man, it's obvious. But the funny thing is, I don't really see people doing this. All right, there it is. A simple but super effective workflow that'll help you guys nail the right level for your pre-masters every single time. If you do this, your mastering engineer's really going to dig it. And don't forget, if you use Ableton Live as your DAW, I've made my own personal Mixdown template that you saw in this video a free download. I've dropped a link for that right below the video. Cool. That's a wrap for this one, guys. Thanks so much for tuning in and watching. If you're not already, subscribe and stay in touch, and I'll catch you guys real soon. Cheers.